my name is Angelique. I'm the events coordinator here at Wellesley Books. So we're all so grateful that you came out tonight. Did somebody bring me a margarita from Los Angeles? Okay, we're a little less grateful. We're really excited tonight to have our hometown girl Eve here, and I know she's all here with friends and family. So we're really happy to have her. And tonight she'll be speaking with Anna. I will introduce them in a minute, but again, I wanted to say thank you because without your support, we could not have these events. So your coming out to the store and being so supportive really means the world to us. If you are not already signed up for our newsletters, please go to wellesleybooks.com and sign up, and you'll get announcements for all of our upcoming events. And just to let you know how the night is going to go, they'll be in conversation for about 35 minutes, and then we'll open the floor up to questions and answers, and then we'll close, and then Eve there's a table over there, she'll go over and sign and personalize your books, and then we'll be done. Great. So I'd like to just remind everyone to please turn off, oh my God. Please turn off your phone ringers. This is a little bit of a homecoming for me too. No, just like people I recognize. It's very fun. Okay, so now on to the good stuff. Tonight, Anna Isabel Kielsen is the co-founder and co-executive director of the Gull Island Institute, a place-based liberal arts institute with a mission to cultivate democratic citizenship for an age of climate change. Before co-founding the Gull Island Institute from 2017 to 2023, she held academic appointments at the Committee on Degree in Social Studies at Harvard University, Deep Springs College, and Sciences Pro in Reims, Paris. I know I butchered that. She holds a PhD in history from Columbia University and a BA in English from Barnard College. Prior to her academic career, she danced professionally. And Eve Dreyer is a writer and a strategist. Her essays and reporting have been published in Grist, Quartz, and Tuscaloosa Review, Harvard Magazine, and Monga Bay, and she has worked as a journalist in Nairobi, a strategy consultant in New York, a climate policy advisor at the U.S. Department of Energy. She is an advisory board member of the Gull Island Institute, which is focused on reinventing liberal arts education for an age of climate change. What We Can't Burn is her first book. Let's give them both a warm Okay. Hello.
I'm turning on here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Angelique, for that lovely welcome. And thank you all for being here. We're so glad that you put down your martinis and margaritas and decided to join us. We were thinking about maybe moving the event next door, but maybe next time. So Eve and I were having a really nice kind of warm-up conversation while you guys are all coming over. And I guess I'll just start by asking a question that we were talking about downstairs, which is, why did you decide to write a book?
Good place to start. Well, no, thank you all again for being here, and Anna, thank you so much for being here with me. Anna and I, it's been such a pleasure to sort of get to know you better over the last few years, and as you heard a little bit about, Anna has been working in the past few years on really starting an institute that in so many ways addresses the exact problems that we kind of set out to depict and wrestle with in the book. And it was when I first heard about it it was Abigail Simon, whose parents are here, and I don't know if she's here. Abigail, who is another social studies student and close friend of mine, was like, "Have you heard about this thing called the Gull Island Institute?" And I was like, "You gotta be kidding me! Like, I can't believe that you guys." It was such a thoughtful response to, I think, the challenge that a lot of undergrads were kind of facing of like, how do we think about climate change and how do we learn about it, and how does our college education kind of prepare us to address it? And so, in many ways, that was our feeling upon graduating, and kind of still having a lot of questions around that challenge was a big part of what motivated us to write the book. And we took it took the form that it took because we didn't necessarily have answers. We didn't necessarily want to make an argument about what should be happening differently, or what climate action approaches are the right ones. It was more just that we felt that the experience of being young and confronting all of these really different stories about the climate crisis, and stories that have different answers about what it asks of us, and where we should go from here, can be really overwhelming and can be at times really alienating, and it certainly was for us. And the book is just an effort to depict that. And the last thing I'll say is, because we were just sort of talking about this, but the book, we kind of set out and we were like, all right, let's see if we can do this. And Tom's a very entrepreneurial person, as you'll learn if you read the book, and he's very ambitious, and he was like, let's do it. Like I was kind of like, a book, really? Like we just graduated, like but I think we kind of had this sense that there was we needed a book, and other people needed a book that took a lot of the kind of tools of the memoir genre and the essay genre, which in our experience had just been these really powerful genres that excavate the emotional kind of complexity of topics like race or gender or addiction, or we'd read these really moving essays, both of us in undergrad, and we felt like that we hadn't encountered as many books like that about climate, and so that was kind of why we set out to write this particular book, and to try to bring those elements to bear.
And that's great, and that's really helpful too. I mean, I think a lot of it does seem like many of the essays that are in the vein of sort of thinking through climate often have to do with having children. Or, I mean, we were just speaking about Maggie Nelson's essay on freedom, which is great, but it does seem like there are, many of the kind of climate essays that you might read today do have to sort of maybe are by folks in their 30s and 40s and are thinking about generations, but to hear from you and Tom, where you're in college, or you're just leaving college, you're kind of heading out into the world, a different voice, a different kind of moment in life. So I think that's one of the things that for me is just so special about this. It's interesting. So I'm curious if you ever thought about other formats. Or if you could envision these conversations in a different format, how could you see them in a different, medium?
Yeah, so there's the moment in the book, and I kind of chuckled when Tom put this in the book, but when I, in college, when we were having one of these, debates about climate, I was like, can I record this? And I was like, I wanted to record it because we would have these conversations, and they would go on, and then it would be like, what just happened? And we kind of joked about starting a podcast, and then we were like, we can't start a podcast, that would be crazy. But I think I had this urge to record them because I just felt like there was so much happening in them, and I had an urge to go back and kind of re-experience them even as they were happening. But then I think when we moved towards this, the medium of writing, I think we did it because even though I think it certainly would be you get a lot of the same things from listening to a version of the book, but I think we wanted to slow down the pace at which we were going back and forth and thinking, and I think that's what the written word on the page allows is you can go back and reread the point again because and sometimes it just takes a little bit longer to really metabolize what someone is sharing with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I think is great. I mean, the messages that we have when it comes to the climate crisis and the things that we feel are often panic, urgency, this sort of rapid speeding up of time. But then on the other hand, we're thinking about history, and we're thinking about, well, when did this mess start? And then we're thinking about geologic time, and so our whole sense of time might be scrambled or confused. And so I think this idea of creating something that you can go back at and back into at your own time and in your own pace, I think there's a real rhythm to the book. The way that you kind of alternate voices and the pace at which it takes to get used to the different voices. is really lovely, and it's a luxury in a moment when it feels like we don't have time. It feels like time is really running out. So that's great. So maybe on the note of time and things taking time, could you talk a little bit about your process? How did you guys actually put this together? How did you write it? Did you send each other emails back and forth? Did you have a Google Doc? What did that look like? I'm very curious.
Well, it's funny. So, and for those who don't know, kind of the premise of the book, there is a lot of this kind of disagreement between my co-author and I, and that's kind of part of what is like the motor of the book. We had a lot of disagreement about the process, and including he was an advocate of Microsoft Word, I was an advocate of Google Docs. So we had lots of debates over the course of the writing. But we did. So we rewrote a lot of it kind of during the pandemic, and so there were times where we were both living kind of in and around Boston, and we would meet up outside and kind of exchange writing, and I think that was really nice to be able to be in person when we were outlining it and thinking about the vision of it. And I think it was important that we started kind of with an outline and with kind of a storyboarding of like, what is the story that we're trying to tell? Where does it start? Who's going to tell what part of it? I think it would have been really hard to kind of do that retroactively, because there were had to really be intentional about what we were going to share. But then we would really just write these drafts and email them back and forth to one another, and it was in hindsight a really intensely kind of vulnerable thing to do with somebody. We I think grew a lot as writers kind of in the writing process, but in those early days, like, we were sending each other very, very rough writing, which I think, a lot of people, it's hard to do that and to trust that someone's going to read it and kind of give you the benefit of the doubt. And so we had to really bear with each other as we kind of piece together the story and then and iterate and kind of edit. It was challenging to, there were a lot of things that were challenging, but it was challenging to edit because, we had reactions, but we also wanted to give each other the authority to be the author of their own parts. But we also wanted to make sure that the reader was not like totally disoriented by being like jerked back and forth between a story that wasn't well coordinated. So we had a lot of debates as well about kind of how to do that and how to achieve that. And it wasn't until we had an agent who read it and a publisher who read it that I think it really kind of became smooth, because there was only so far that we could take it without there being like a third party kind of mediator to make sure that we were handing the mic over in a kind of a non-chaotic way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious then, do you feel like you've changed as a writer as a result of this process, or how did this how did the writing of this book, and it sounds like you and Tom hadn't actually written anything together before. This was just like a huge leap of faith in some sense in the power of your friendship to do this. But I'm curious how you feel like you might have changed as a writer, you might have grown individually.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't actually thought about that before, but in hindsight, I think it's really dramatic the way in which I think I went from being honestly quite a perfectionist. Like I think I hadn't published much and I hadn't even written much because I would, I care a lot about words and exactly the way that they land, and so there would be pieces that I would just take a long time to kind of feel good about. But Tom is the complete opposite, and he, one of the things that we talked about was, so he's an entrepreneur, and one of the concepts that he was therefore familiar with was the concept of the soft launch, where something doesn't have to be right, like it doesn't have to be perfect, you just put it out and then you can make it better along the way. That's not how books usually work. we were joking, like, what if we could just soft launch it on Amazon, see what the reviews are, and then and it was just like, there's something about comparing the process of writing to the process of like launching a product that kind of did help me get past some of that like inhibition, and I think he also pushed me to really like just give it a whirl, and he's a very fearless person in a lot of ways, and so I think I give him a lot of credit in terms of like just the process pushing me to kind of just put something out, even if there's still lots of places I'm like, ugh. But I think a lot of writers experience that, and so I think it's nice to be pushed to kind of look back upon that, because in hindsight, 4 or 5 years ago, I think it would have been hard to imagine myself kind of just putting something out, especially when I know that if I already feel that way about 5 years from now, I'm sure I'll have lots of other thoughts about what I would have done differently.
Yeah, well, you can, you have the next book to, just out of curiosity and just for a frame of reference, and this is not in any way meant to, Eve, you can close your eyes. I just want to know how many folks have read the book, because I think it might determine what question I ask next. Hey, everybody. Okay, cool. So, yeah, I this one wasn't on the list of questions that I sent you, but I don't think it's too curveballish to think about the rails. If you had to pick one or two kind of moments in the book that for you really were like personally transformative, what might those be? I'm actually genuinely curious to hear. You can take a second to think about that, or we can also come back to it too.
That's such an interesting question. I think so. There's this one. The first part that comes to my mind, just because I think it was a part that where I didn't. I think it makes me think of the quote from Joan Didion of I write to figure out what I think. It was a section that I figured out what I thought through writing it. And it's the part when I was just arriving in Kenya, and I wasn't just there, but I was there with Tom, and we had just visited his factory. And I experienced this kind of disorienting. I was disoriented for various reasons, because I was in a foreign place and with someone I didn't know very well. But just seeing, just for some context, I had been studying, environmental studies and thinking about a lot of these questions for a couple of years, and spending a lot of time thinking about them, but in a very kind of intellectual way. And then Tom had started a clean energy company in Kenya, and so we were visiting his operations, and I just felt this hurtling downward, almost physically in my body, and it was just this feeling of, wow, I have been approaching this whole problem of climate through such a deeply kind of cerebral lens, and seeing the operations of the factory and just the literal way in which they were taking the sugarcane waste and compressing it, and just building a company that made something happen differently. It was I felt not only that the actual ideas that I had been thinking about were there was something missing from them, but I even just felt physically the way that I was as a person approaching the problem shifted. And I think when it happened, I didn't really know kind of why I felt that way. I think it was a little bit there's something sort of off-putting to me about also or at the time there was something off-putting to me about the language of entrepreneurship, and he and his co-founder were throwing all these words around about funding rounds and Series B and all this stuff, and I was I thought that was why I was disoriented, but I think in writing it I realized that it was a more physical sensation of kind of coming out of the ivory tower and into a world that physically needs to be transformed.
That's beautiful. Thanks. I think in some ways that's the experience that your reader has, or kind of goes on that journey with you from, or at least I think, reading what you write, going from this experience of trying to wrap your head around a problem by wrapping your head around it, and then realizing, well, that's not quite enough. There has to be more to it, and I might not entirely know what I'm doing, but I have to do something, and I have to do something with my hands. And this is all unfolding in a space, partly in a space at a college that doesn't really teach you how to do stuff with your hands. It teaches you how to do a lot with your mind. And so it's very telling that happens when you're in Kenya, and some of those descriptions of being in Kenya, and it is very much about feeling displaced, but also feeling that sort of physical weight of something. So that's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I do think that it's something that I think we didn't realize that we were, again, something we kind of realized, I think, through the writing itself. I don't think that we went into it thinking that we wanted to make an argument per se. I think we were just telling our story. But I do think that we realized that we did want to kind of make an argument about this point and about the fact that, you know, education obviously plays many roles and has played many roles, and there's, you know, continues to be lots of discussion about what role it should play. And I think we're certainly not arguing that, like, education needs to be primarily kind of a pre-professional function that gets you ready to take action in whatever form it may take. But there was something about, I think, the not just the liberal arts environment, but also about the climate conversation that did seem to be oftentimes siloed, like those who were more thinking about it kind of abstractly or teaching about it abstractly, and talking about what are the stories that we're telling, what is the language that we need to be using, which facts are correct, what's disinformation, what's not. We're often at times really separate from the people who were doing the kind of more physical work of, you know, building new energy companies and, you know, literally kind of having their fingers kind of in the soil, or more directly kind of engaging with the planet that we're talking about. And I think that we wanted to sort of just not only make the case that those different stakeholders need to be in closer kind of collaboration, but also just kind of calling for more mutual respect between them, because I think there can be a lot of really still divisive divides between, for example, activists, intellectuals, journalists, and, you know, entrepreneurs and investors and engineers, who I think because of these words like capitalism and eco-modernism and words that sort of draw out the ways in which we're looking at the same problem really differently, inadvertently really fracture a movement that needs to be united.
Maybe that brings me to another question. I'm just checking on that. We're good on time. Okay, great. That brings me to a question that we touched upon a little bit when we were talking before this. You know, in many ways, I think this is a book about climate. It's a book about thinking through a kind of just energy transition. It's a book about friendship. It's also a book about disagreement and debate and the language that we use to articulate what we're doing and what we think. And you know, at this moment, when the language of debate is, I think, top of mind, I'm curious if you think, and then coming on the heels of what you just said, you know, the climate crisis requires that we do a lot of things differently. Does it require that we speak differently? Does it require that we, you know, talk to each other differently? And if so, what does that language look like? And if not, you know, if we already have the tools to communicate or debate effectively, to have a kind of civic discourse, true civic discourse around climate, what might that look like in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that just because of the nature of the problem being so deeply, you know, the very fact that we know about it is indebted to science, and yet the things we have to do about it are range from, you know, engaging so many other disciplines. Like, it's just such an inherently interdisciplinary problem that we do have to get, I think, a lot better at speaking across disciplines, which is something that people say a lot, but I think we kind of wanted to really depict like how hard that can be, and how what that often entails is speaking to people who are using words that you don't understand. And there's an element of humility that has to come with that, and also confidence of just being like, I don't actually know what you're talking about, but I'll ask, and like I'll sort of continue the conversation anyway. And so I think that that's one thing. But then I think the other thing that I think I've come to feel more strongly and more in recent years, and kind of I think some of my work at the Department of Energy really underscored this, is like, you know, sometimes we actually are never gonna all agree on the story of climate. Like, we never agree on any stories anyway, but like climate in particular, there's just so many axes on which we can, you know, come apart on in terms of where we take it. But we don't actually need to agree with everybody in order to take the same actions. And so I think there's, for example, you know, you can be at a protest with somebody and standing next to them and they may actually have an entirely different reason for being there than you do, but you're still standing there. And similarly, you might be there might be two people who are installing heat pumps on their houses, and they're doing it for completely different reasons. There's so many climate actions that can be motivated by diverse kind of narratives or motivations, and so I think rather than necessarily fixating on this question of how do we talk about climate, I think there's this argument that the book has about maybe we don't actually need to talk about it. Maybe talking about it the right way isn't actually necessary in all cases, and it's more about what are their next steps and how can we kind of stand alongside other people in taking those next steps, even when we don't agree with them. And in certain cases, what that might actually look like is being quiet and taking actions in silence and just sort of not needing conversation and discourse to be the avenue through which we chart all of our progress.
That's great. Thank you. How are we doing on time?
Okay.
We're good? Okay. Great. And are we going to be taking questions from the audience?
Yes, I can help. I can come up and count the mic around so people can hear.
All right, great.
I'll come up.
Super. Great. What do you hope people walk away with from reading your book?
It's funny. I think when we first were writing it, I think we thought about that, and we did think it was mostly a book about climate, and we wanted people to come away with a sense of just a more kind of tangible sense of what it could look like for them or for anyone to sort of take diverse types of climate action, whether that's it is more around forming a political movement or building companies or anything in between. But I think that as people have started to read the book, it's been interesting to see that the different things that people have taken away that often have actually nothing to do with climate. The book is in many ways really just about two people who are wrestling with the same kind of set of questions, but in different ways, and what it looks like to do that with somebody else. And so I think that there are some people who have expressed coming away with a sense of a new kind of desire to form relationships or maintain relationships with people who it's actually really hard to talk to, because there are a lot of moments of friction or of anger or of disagreement that sometimes it is easier to sort of move away from. But I think that it now is a new hope that we have, that and it's not always productive, but in a lot of cases it can be, when you pick the right conversations and the right kind of sense of shared mission or shared values, it can be just at a minimum very educational to talk to people who at first blush kind of feel like they're deeply at odds with you. But then, I don't know, it's been really cool to see, there was actually this guy who recently read the book who, he's a Kenyan American PhD student in chemistry, and he said he was reading the book and he came in with a lot of the same perspectives that Tom had towards American activism, just like a visceral kind of, not disgust, but something close to it. But through reading the book, he said that shortly after he finished it, he got a call from a union organizer who was working to unionize the grad students at his school, and he was like, this is the second time she's called him, but this time he answered and was actually, I kind of maybe do want to join this union. And I was like, wow, I would never have thought that would be something that someone would take away from it. But I think there are just so few opportunities sometimes for people who are in, whether you're accustomed to hanging out with people who are activists or accustomed to hanging out with people who are entrepreneurs, or those are just two of the groups that we that are relevant, but those are the two groups that we were kind of depicting. There are a lot of stereotypes and visceral reactions to sort of engaging with people that if you don't really kind of know much about them. And so I think I do also hope that it leaves readers with kind of a it tears down some of those maybe initial stereotypes or reactions that people may have in either direction.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, it does seem, especially when it comes to climate, it's hard to hang on to both the sort of a sense of optimism, sense of possibility, sense of, yes, well, things are bad, but, history is not just happening, or the future is not preordained. We can take control, we can change it up, right? On the one hand, having this kind of optimism, on the other hand, just feeling like, oh my God, the world is going to hell in a handbag, right? For any number of reasons, climate being one of them. And so there's this deep sense of cynicism, or even nihilism for, I think, many people. But I think that it seems like there's a message of like, well, it's not that friendship is a metaphor, but friendship is messy. Friendship contains, moments of real optimism and possibility, and also like real anger and frustration, and like, maybe I'm gonna quit, but we just stick it out and we hang in there, and something is going to come of it, and it's probably not something that we would have foreseen when we started. And I think, that to me speaks, you can kind of take it how you will, but I think there is a kind of optimism, or a kind of hopefulness in that, and the possibility of kind of creating something, but sticking with it. Don't give up.
No, that's a beautiful metaphor. I thought, / maybe you were making this analogy between friendship and climate. I don't know if that's where you were going with it. That's what you sparked in my mind, because there is this kind of, I think, parallel between the way that the attitude that we have towards our friendship, and then the attitude I think that we have towards the climate fight, which is like one of kind of like being very aware of all of the challenges, and looking them in the eye, but then continuing anyway. And I think that the book in some ways it charts our very different kind of journeys through both cynicism and optimism. And I think Tom starts out quite cynical, because he had just faced a very devastating setback with his company that he had started, and I came into college much more idealistic, and then I think over the course of the book, I think we shaped each other's. We also, a lot happened, and I think we ended up in both different places. And so I think that there's kind of an element of like ending up somewhere in the middle of hope or cynicism, and that's the only place that you can kind of be coming from if you continue to work on this problem. But this kind of element of, I think, in a lot of relationships, and I can't speak to marriage, but from what I've heard, there's like this element of like, things do get really hard, and when you are sort of fighting as a these people who are 80 years old and have been climate activists for 40 years, there's like this you need to develop this ability to kind of confront the impossibility of something, and the threat of rupture, and the threat of and nothing working, and then just continue regardless. And I think that that's interesting to think about, the parallels in which that can show up in our relationships with one another, as well as in some of these very intractable things like the energy transition.
Yeah. Maybe if we have time for one more. Sure. Yeah. So Eve, what's next?
Well, so when we finished writing this book, it was we were kind of exhausted. We were kind of like it was both a wonderful process, and I think we were both a little bit like unsure what role we wanted writing to play in our lives moving forward. And part of that was we were just graduating and taking on other jobs, and I wasn't sure if I kind of wanted to keep writing, or if it was more of just like I wanted to be working on climate through other means and through my job. But then little by little, I kind of I started reading more poetry, and I think just because my life was busy, I started writing these little poems like in very interstitial moments of my life, like on the subway, or like, and it was in part because I didn't have time to like sit down and write other stuff, but I think I also just was like gravitating more towards that genre as a way of like not needing to like tell a story or necessarily make sense, but just like kind of have no rules and like just kind of write what was coming up. And I started reading more of it and realizing that there were so many different things that a poem could be, and that was really fun. to discover. And so yeah, I just over the past few years have been writing a lot of poetry, and I was not sure if I was ever going to do anything with it. I thought probably not. They were kind of all living somewhere in the line between a journal entry and then something that was more than that. But earlier this year, my mom, who is an English teacher, and I were talking about it, and she was like, "I want to help you. Like, kind of, if you do want to, figure out what it would look like to share these. Like, these are really beautiful. We should give it a go." So we went to this house in upstate New York, a little Airbnb, and she helped me print. She printed out all like 200 of the poems that I had written over the last few years, and we just sat there together and like sorted them into like different piles of like different themes, and then ones that we felt like were ready to publish or ones that needed to be worked on, and it was so much fun. And it was just it was like, whoa, I actually have written like a lot of these poems, and it was cool to go back. It felt like my life was flashing before my eyes of like these little moments that I had forgotten about but had kind of memorialized in these poems. And so anyway, we put together what I hope will be kind of a collection of poems, and so I think that's my hope, is that I'll be able to publish a poetry collection next.
Can I ask if it's climate themed or friendship themed, or?
There's actually, I think, a lot of threads of both. There's a lot of themes of friendship, mainly about the past few years I've been living in Brooklyn with 4 roommates who are like my closest friends, and it has been just so inspiring to live with them, and there's just so many unique, I think, elements of kind of living so intimately with friends that have sparked a lot of them, but then the ecology and kind of the broader my broader feelings about both like the dauntingness but also the little moments of hope and beauty around climate also kind of show up in a lot of places, and so it's less like direct, but I think they do a lot of times get at some of those themes.
That's great, thank you. Do any of you have questions?
Take it out.
Thank you very much. My name is Rob. I will read the book and I will read the blurb to find out kind of the elevator speech of what your book is about. But I found that I heard a lot of really interesting things tonight. And two ideas come to mind. One is just a recommendation, which you probably know, and that is to connect with the Merwin Foundation, W.S. Merwin, American poet. The Merwin Foundation is on Maui. Merwin rehabilitated a 100-acre tract or so of discarded agricultural land and created a paradise there of palm trees. You should really check it out. They have an artist in residence program. The other question, really a little more speculative, is that in this store, or this type of store, are there 1 to 5, maybe just one, foundational reading that you would recommend for orienting one's ship in the proper direction that I'm guessing your book suggests, Thoreau or whatever? Thank you.
Thank you. That's such a great question. I feel like it sounds like a plant. Like, no, I love that you asked that, because so I think I have a very quick answer, which is this guy Bill McKibben was truly, not only the guy whose books taught me most of what I know about what's in this book, but continues to be an activist that really inspires me. There's a lot of, the book addresses this movement called fossil fuel divestment, which I had no idea what that was about, and I didn't know what divestment was. There was a lot of reading I had to do to kind of like wrap my head around it. But Bill McKibben, who started the movement, has written a lot of great articles that he's written some shorter articles that are good places to start. But then the book, and my favorite book of his is called Oil and Honey, and it does detail the movement and a lot of the work that he's done around kind of it details a little bit about the history of the fossil fuel industry, very kind of intentionally spreading disinformation about climate, but it goes back and forth between his work around that and then his experience with his friend as a beekeeper, and it's a beautiful memoir that kind of is I think a good starting point because it's not too heavy-handed, but it makes the topic personal. And then there's another book that is, I would say, more overall, it's denser, but it's very richly informative, called Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes. And that one goes into a lot of detail about the kind of history of a lot of these topics. So I would say those two.
So we see a lot today about people who have a really hard time talking to people who have different perspectives. Mm-hmm. So what did you and Tom bring to the table that enabled you guys to do something different than we see every day?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that we, one of the things that we don't claim that the book offers is necessarily like a how-to or like not to say that I think we disagreed in the right way or any of that, but I think what made us at a minimum, want to disagree and want to keep disagreeing and talking to each other was, I think we were both perplexed by the situation we found ourselves in which we fundamentally were so on the same page about not just the fact that climate change was happening, but that we really wanted to do something about it, and that there were all these sort of elements of kind of one of the things that was animating the urgency was also the gulf between the impacts on the global south and the global north. And so we had all these shared starting points, but then we had such different perspectives on kind of where to go from there. And I think because we agreed on that foundation, I think it felt productive to understand, well, we want the same thing. Like, why are we so at odds? And I think it can be hard to know why you would want to talk to somebody if you don't have that shared starting point and if there isn't a sense that you have the same goals. And so I think that was part of it. I think the other part of it, which again was something I don't think I appreciated until later, was like the way that I met Tom was there were a very unusual situation in which I ended up staying with his family in Kenya because I was going there for a different reason, and so getting to know him very well, before I knew anything about his politics or what we disagreed about. And it's just, I think, really hard in a lot of cases when you know somebody personally and deeply to dismiss them. I think that like when you understand their humanity, it's like it goes without saying, but it's easier to understand where they're coming from in a way that when you just meet somebody on the street or on social media, it's a lot easier to disregard their ideas. And so I think those were probably two of the main reasons. But I think the last thing I'll say is like I think the other thing that the book isn't trying to necessarily say is that it's always a good use of time to spend a lot of time disagreeing. I think that in a lot of cases, for example, like I've been doing some phone banking around the election, and like one of the key things they tell you to do is not to waste any time like arguing with someone, because in a lot of cases, especially when you don't have that shared personal background, it is a waste of time, particularly if you're trying to mobilize people politically. But I think that for us as students who our goal with these conversations wasn't to like convince one of the other person to vote for something, or it was purely like I think we were scratching this itch of like having learned about this topic a lot, but there wasn't a forum in a classroom or anywhere else to like really synthesize like what we had learned and then the ways it clashed with other perspectives. And so it was almost this like kind of recreational like back and forth thing that we were doing that I think we gave it the space that we gave it, and we had the space to give it that we had because that we were in a college setting and we didn't have some like urgent end goal that we were driving to.
Thanks.
Maybe just to add a little color to what you just said. I mean, it's striking, and I hadn't quite thought about it in these terms until you just said it now. But you have conversations in you make use of the college as a space to be with other people. So they have conversations in, living rooms or at parties or in dorm rooms. Like, they're showing up to these spaces where they actually encounter other people and kind of have to have conversations with humans. It's not like you're kind of texting your way through the liberal arts experience. So I think that's something that's very striking about the book too. You do feel like you're in college.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we really came to appreciate about the liberal arts environment was like, it is a place where you have these like structured opportunities for conversation, like a classroom, but then in clubs there's like extracurriculars. But so much of, I think, where we found that in college we learned and like really internalized was in those other spaces, because you're all living in this little pile, and so there's lots of other moments when in an unstructured way you kind of actually have these like moments where things click.
Question back here. There you go.
Thank you, Eve. I treasure the fact that you've brought all these people together with your vision, and I'm always curious about how these things begin. I'm wondering if you have a poem that you might have written at the moment that you and Tom decided to do this. Was that a moment that you can still visualize and recall when that decision was made? And then did you take the time to journal about it or to write a piece about it?
Interesting. So the question is when we decided to write the book, that moment?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. So I actually don't remember the moment when we decided to write this book, but there was this moment that we actually did write that was at one point in the book, but we ended up taking it out, was this conversation that we had right when I think it was at the very end of the same school, I think it was the same school year that all these events happened in, but when the dust had really settled around kind of our conflicts, and we had stopped, we were giving the topic of climate change a bit of a rest, and we were just talking about like what we were doing over the summer, and Tom was like going to Kenya, and he was about to do all this research that he was then planning to publish in a psychology journal, and I was also going to do research for my thesis. But he was like, "Oh, are you going to publish?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I haven't really thought about that. Like, I didn't really know that was something that we could do." And he just like, I remember he looked at me in this like really intense way, and he was like, if I could write like you can write, like I would drop everything and write a book. And I was like, it like completely like floored me, because I was like, I just had never had someone whose opinion I respected so much like look at me now with such force, and Tom has a very like forceful gaze, and I was like, well, you are a beautiful writer. And so anyway, we just had this moment of like, I think for me at least it was a moment where I had to kind of confront the fact that I did really want to write a book, but I had never like thought concretely about trying to do it. And so we kind of joked at that conversation, like, we should do it together. But that was like a year or so before we actually set out to write this one.
So I think we have time for one more question.
I have a question. Oh, go for it, please.
Just a quick question. You mentioned not wasting time on somebody whose mind is made up, but I've got a friend or two who are climate deniers, and I would love to talk to them about it. Usually I just talk about the Patriots or something like that. Do you have an approach? Do you run into people that that you respect, in other ways, to break that ice? Because I would like to talk to them about some of the scientific basis for climate change.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think that the book and a lot of the conversations that we had in college were, we were kind of wrestling with this question of like, how do you talk to someone who already agrees that climate change is a problem, but so it's not, you don't have to talk about science, you just have to talk about kind of almost like politics and economics. And I think we were fortunate that in a lot of cases we weren't running into a lot of people who, like, the starting point was actually much like earlier. It was like, okay, what are the scientific facts and what are the bases for them? So there's this book that just came out that is called The Language of Climate Politics that basically goes through a lot of the kind of most commonly held like sort of myths today, and it does give some pretty, I think, like tactical responses to them. And so that's, I think, the place I would recommend in terms of like literal, like kind of facts and scientific stats to kind of have on hand. But I think that there is an element of like, I personally have actually never successfully convinced a climate denier that climate change is real. I think that there can be something so like deep in terms of like what types of information that those people trust that is so just found at their core, and I know that I fit squarely in the category of the types of information or information bearers that they don't trust. And so I think that besides kind of finding ways and inroads armed with those facts, but then through whatever the unique dynamics of each relationship is, I'm sure that there are ways, but I have to be honest that like I personally don't know that I've ever kind of found that path.
And it also seems like, I'm just thinking about union organizing, but at the end of the day, you want to peg whatever you're talking about to something that person cares about. So if it's the Patriots, maybe there's a way to talk about climate connected to football. I'm serious.
Games
getting
rained out.
Yeah. But I the last thing I'll say is on a maybe more hopeful note is like I think kind of going back to the point about like we don't actually all have to agree on what we're saying to agree on what to do. There's so many people who are already kind of doing the work of switching over to solar, switching to heat pumps, switching to electric cars, who aren't doing it because they believe any climate science. It's just to save money. And so I think that can also be like a constructive starting point. Is like when there are those opportunities to switch things over, where there's cost savings. Like I think people can be part of the solution even if they maybe are still not on the same page in terms of the facts.
Great. Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
Could a student major in energy transitionology today in a university?
Well, so I wish, but your question makes me think.
How long will it take?
I mean, so one of the things that the book also talks about, and which is kind of a nice kind of way to circle back to the work that Anna is doing, is there is, I think, this real like urgency with which a lot of universities right now are reckoning with the inadequacy of their kind of like environmental studies programs. And it's not because they aren't well-intentioned kind of like programs, but it's really hard to design a program that brings together all the disciplines, but creates like a sort of a pathway for students to move through that isn't too overwhelming. And so I think there are a lot of majors that are kind of starting to look different and able to take classes across different disciplines in ways that you couldn't before. But I think that even still, there's like, okay, well, is it, if you can take some classes in energy economics and then some classes in climate science, like, what do you do with that, or where does that leave you? So the Gull Island Institute, which Anna and her husband Justin co-founded, is this kind of, I think, really interesting way of supplementing whatever it is that you major in. It's like a sort of a program that takes you off campus. There's also programs that happen on campus. But it's this question of like, okay, no matter what you major in, no matter what you're like reading about, what does it look like to kind of then put into practice some of those ideas? And so there's this three-pronged approach, and I'm not just like pitching this for the sake of being nice to Anna. Like I genuinely think it's a really like interesting solution to this problem of universities not knowing exactly how to teach this topic. There's like a three-pillared approach where there's a seminar where you do read about everything from climate science to literature. Then there's like a labor component, and so the students literally go and work on like a shellfish farm. And then there's a self-governance component, and where they actually look at the challenging work of democratic politics and how to sort of do consensus-based decision making. And so I think that it's hard. In some cases, no matter what the environmental studies department offers, there are fundamental limitations to like what a campus setting can help you figure out as an undergrad. And I think programs like this, like, are probably going to, in my opinion, continue to be necessary to sort of enable colleges to like really holistically offer students like a way of kind of wrapping not just their minds, but you know, their whole selves around kind of the challenge that we're facing.
Thank you both so much for being here. A lot of hope. So I think that's what's really important, is to sort of leave with that hope that we can, well, we're going to walk home to our houses tonight, right? So again, thank you so much. They will be signing books over here. We're going to form the signing line. So we'll get you going on that. So thank you again so much for coming tonight. We really appreciate it.